Hello everyone. Before we get to the video, I would just like to thank everyone for joining my 4-hour stream yesterday. I really had a good time, and I did have some help from Jan and Domagoj. So really, thanks to both of you for joining in on my stream. I know streaming is hard work, and again, it was a record with the live viewers, over 700 viewers, and a record in the participants in the tournament. We had over, I believe it's over 330 participants. So it was the biggest tournament so far. So thank you all for that. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did as well. So that being said, let's get to the game. This game was played in 1984, so Anatoly Karpov is the world champion for one more year, but he is, and he's playing against a great chess player from Filipino. Before Wesley So became such a famous player, Filipino had had another grandmaster that was crushing world champions. That is Eugenio Torre, or maybe it's Eugenio. So I will say Eugenio, but in case it's Eugenio, pretend I said that. And Eugenio Torre is actually Asia's first grandmaster. He became a grandmaster in 1974, so 10 years before this game was played. He was 22 years old, and this isn't the only time he defeated Karpov. He also beat Karpov 8 years before this game was played in 1976 in Manila, and this game is like Filipinos' great legacy. And I will show this game as well. I will show it tomorrow, but for today I chose this game. This was a game, it was played in London, and this is the first time London had such a strong chess tournament. There were 14 players, all 14 were top grandmasters, such as Jan Timan, Viktor Korchnoi, Yasser Serevan played, Eugenio Torre, Anatoly Karpov. So a lot of strong players, and what's interesting about this tournament is that this is one of Torre's worst tournaments ever. He finished in last place with 5 points, and Karpov won the tournament with one whole point ahead of everyone else, even losing the game to Eugenio Torre. So it's quite a lovely game. This we have Karpov who won first place and Torre who won last place, and they're playing this wonderful game where Karpov doesn't go calmly as he usually does, but he goes on a little adventure, which doesn't end well. So let's see the game. D4 was played. Oh yeah, and I just want to say that Eugenio Torre played board 1 for the Philippines in 18 World Chess Olympiads. So, quite a guy. D4, we have knight to f6, c4, e6, knight to c3, and Karpov goes for the Nimzo Indian, bishop to b4. E3, c5, knight g to e2, the Rubinstein variation of the Nimzo. C captures on d4, e captures on d4, Karpov castles. We have a3, and here black of course can capture the knight, and this is how Nimzowitsch always thought that the Nimzowitsch defense should be played. You capture the knight, b captures on c3, and then you somehow provoke white to push d5 and create a nice outpost for your knight on c5. But after a3, Karpov goes for bishop to e7. Torre plays d5. We have e captures on d5, c captures on d5, and now white is threatening d6 to capture that bishop on e7. So a move like rook to e8 could definitely have been played, so the bishop has an escape square on f8, but Karpov goes again for bishop to c5. So already a lot of moves for this dark square bishop. b4, attacking the bishop on c5, now bishop to b6, and like I said, Karpov played so many moves with this bishop that Torre really wants it out of the way. And knight to a4, he wants to destroy this strong bishop. And unfortunately, you cannot retreat with the bishop to c7 because you get the d6, and the bishop has to go back. And after bishop to b6, knight captures, queen captures, and bishop to e3, Torre would get too much development for Karpov really achieving nothing. So after knight to a4, d6 was played, and Torre happily captures the dark square bishop. Knight captures, a captures, and we have knight to g3. Rook to e8 with check, bishop to e2, and what do we have here? What has Karpov accomplished with this? Okay, he does have an open file for his rook on a8, One other thing that we almost always see in Karpov's games, he isolated a pawn, and now Karpov will pretty much pull all his efforts into capturing this pawn on d5. And there are a couple of ways to do this. Well, simply developing would be okay for Karpov. Knight b to d7, or maybe even knight to a6 followed by knight to c7 to pile up on the d5 pawn that way. Because if white can't really exchange the bishop for the knight, even if he could, he probably wouldn't, giving up the bishop pair, you know. But Karpov decides to go on a little adventure here with his rook, and he goes for the immediate rook to e5. And okay, by playing rook to e5, you do win the pawn. There is no way white can defend the d5 pawn, but there is one problem to this. Bishop to b2, and Karpov thought that, okay, this might be okay, but this rook will have a really hard time getting back. Rook captures on d5, Karpov wins the d5 pawn, so no problems there. Queen to c1, getting the queen out of the way, and now we have knight to c6. We have a kingside castle by Torre. The problem with bishop to f3, you can't immediately go for the rook, is knight to e5. And now you can't capture the rook because you get knight to d3 check, forking the king and queen. You either have to castle and allow this knight to capture the bishop, then the rook will be perfectly fine on d5, or the other option would be to play bishop to e2, so you just wasted a move and Karpov improved his position. So instead, after knight to c6, Torre castled, knight to e5. Now, Karpov is not allowing bishop to f3. We have queen to e3, bishop to e6, and now h3, not allowing any knight to g4 ideas. b5, creating an outpost for the knight on c4, and also if the knight on e5 moves, bishop to c4 will not be an idea for Torre. Rook a to c1, putting a rook on that beautiful open c file. Bishop to d7, rook f to e1, rook to c8. Now, to confront the rook on c1, rook captures on c8, queen captures on c8, and f4. And this is where Karpov has to be really careful. Like I said, he did create an outpost for his knight on c4, but instead in this position Karpov played knight to g6. So let's just check this out. What happens if knight to c4? If knight to c4, this would go into a pretty long but a pretty forced line. If knight to c4, then bishop captures, b captures, bishop captures on f6, and now not immediately recapturing the bishop, but first rook to d3, improving the position of the black rook. Also attacking the knight if the queen moves. So queen to f2, defending the knight, and now g captures on f6. But here black has some problems. He does have a strong passed c pawn, but he will never get to push it. Knight to h5, now with threats of knight captures on f6. So after a move like f5, you get queen to h4. Now there are a lot of threats. For example, queen to g5, followed by checkmate on g7. You do have to stop this. h6, but now you get rook to e7. Now the threat is knight to f6 check, winning the bishop. So after you stop this, for example, bishop to c6, you get queen to f6 with threats of queen g7 checkmate. Only move to stop this, queen to f8, and now the move that if Karpov didn't go for knight c4, I have to assume that he saw this move for Torre, b5. And this b5 is destroying all of black's defenses. Bishop captures on b5. Now rook captures on b7. And the problem is you don't really have a good square for the bishop. If you play something like bishop to c6, for example, attacking the rook, you get rook to b8, and white wins the game. Rook cannot be captured as queen to g7 is checkmate. Even if you block with the bishop, simply rook captures bishop, you're attacking here, and this would be pretty terrible for black. So after this rook captures on b7, you have to play immediately bishop to e8. But now rook to b8, the threat of rook captures bishop on e8 is now real. Now you have to play rook to d1. You do have to play rook to d1, so the king moves, and now you have rook to e1 to protect. But now queen to c3. Now the threat is, of course, knight to f6, and also this comes with a threat of queen captures rook on e1. Rook to e6, and now now comes the real problem. Rook captures. You have to capture with the rook because queen to g7 checkmate is still there. So rook captures, knight to f6 check, and the king has to go to the dark square. King goes to h8, and now knight captures rook. White is up a piece, and white is winning this game easily. So there was a lot to consider after this f4 move. Can the knight go to c4? And who knows, maybe Karpov saw all of this. Knight to g6 by Karpov. Bishop captures on f6, now g captures on f6, and we have bishop to f3. And now you can't save the rook, unfortunately. Queen to c4. Torre captures the rook, bishop captures, we have queen captures, and now knight to e4. And this knight to e4 is such a beautiful move because it prepares something great. The threat, of course, now is knight captures on f6 with a fork on the king and the queen. And after king to g7, which was played in the game, Torre could have played queen to c3. This would have been with great advantage for white, but he goes for the immediate blow. Knight captures on f6, and this is very nice. Karpov probably saw this move, but it's not like he could have done anything about it. King captures on f6, and now queen to c3 check. And what do you have here? Well, there is really no square for the king other than f5. The problem with king to f5 is g4 check. Now only move is king captures on f4, and queen to e3 is checkmate. Yes, so after queen to c3 check, Karpov played knight to e5, but now f captures on e5 with check, d captures on e5, and rook to f1 now comes with check. King to e6, now queen to c2, threatening to capture the pawn. Also queen to f5 check is an idea. So e4, pushing the passed pawn and also not allowing the queen into the game. Queen to c3 now by Eugenio, threatening queen to f6 with checkmate. So this has to be stopped. f5, but now queen to g7, and now this king on e6 is, well, just sad. Karpov knows this, of course. Also, he's down the exchange, so he will play a couple more moves. You know, he is the world champion, so why not? Queen to d2. Queen captures on h7, grabbing the pawn. Queen to e3 with check. King h2, now queen to g5, Torre pushes h4, queen to g4, and now we have queen to h6 check, king to e5, and now queen to g5. And this queen to g5 is a very poisonous move. Torre now wants to exchange queens, as he's very confident in his ability to win this endgame. It's completely winning for white. And there is a problem. If you want to keep the queens on the board and play a move like queen to e2, this loses by force. Queen to e7 check, threatening to capture the bishop. After bishop blocks, you get rook captures on f5, and this is completely winning for white. If you move the king to d4, you lose the bishop and the game. And of course, if you capture the rook, king captures, you get queen to g5 checkmate. A beautiful idea by Torre. So after queen to g5, Karpov saw this. He accepted the queen trade. Queen captures on g5, h captures on g5. E3, Karpov pushes his passed pawn. Now g6, Torre responds with pushing a passed pawn of its own. King to f6, king to g3, bishop to e6, king to f4, e2, rook e1, now bishop to c4, protecting that e2 rook. But g7, king has to capture, king captures on g7, now king captures on f5. Well, this move wasn't played. Karpov just captured the pawn and then he resigned the game. Because after king captures on f5, there's really nothing for black to do here. The winning idea is very simple here. You just bring the king all the way to f2, for example. So the king has to guard the e1 square, and then the rook is free to enter the game and well, easily win it. Win the b7 pawn and then push the g pawn. Also, there are some ideas with pushing a4 to break this protection of the bishop on c4. So this Karpov knows this, of course, and he resigns the game. So yeah, that's the game. Karpov versus Torre. Karpov won the tournament. Torre got last place, but Torre also defeated the great Karpov. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, tomorrow I will show you his more famous game, played in 1976 in Manila. And I would like to thank Dave Pierce, Faisal, Alsayjan, and Armin Nadarovitz for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. And once again, I thank you all for joining my stream yesterday. It was quite the experience. I really enjoyed it, and hope to do some more tournaments very soon. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon.